That old resentment you carry is a weight you never agreed to hold. We all know the feeling, that heavy, quiet burden of a grudge that colors our days and steals our peace. It is a universal human struggle, this battle between our hurt and our hope. But what if the path to setting that weight down was not about weakness, but about the most profound strength we can muster? Today, we embark on a journey through timeless wisdom stories from across cultures and history, each one a masterclass in the incredible, transformative power of forgiveness and reconciliation. By the end, you'll possess a new lens through which to view your own conflicts and the stories of others, revealing how letting go and making peace can rewrite futures. We will see how a father's grace defies all logic and how a nation chose truth over vengeance. What is the most difficult act of forgiveness you have ever witnessed? A young man once asked for his inheritance while his father was still alive. In the culture of the story, this request was more than rude. It was a symbolic death wish, a declaration that he valued his father's wealth more than his father's life. He took the money and left for a distant country where he squandered everything in reckless living. Soon, a severe famine struck the land, and he found himself utterly destitute, so hungry he longed to eat the pods he was feeding to pigs. This was the lowest point imaginable, a state of complete humiliation and loss. In that moment of desperate clarity, he decided to return home. He rehearsed a speech planning to say, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." He expected judgment, at best a conditional acceptance based on his willingness to work. But the story takes a breathtaking turn. While the son was still a long way off, his father saw him. This is the first crucial detail. The father was watching, waiting, hoping. Filled with compassion, he ran to his son. In that culture, a dignified elder did not run. He walked with measured steps. But this father hiked up his robes and sprinted, throwing dignity aside in his urgency to reach his boy. He embraced him and kissed him before a single word of the rehearsed apology could be spoken. The father then interrupted the son's confession, shouting orders to his servants. "Bring the best robe, put a ring on his hand, sandals on his feet, and kill the fattened calf. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Notice the sequence. Forgiveness came first, celebration came next. The restoration of status, symbolized by the robe, the ring, and the sandals, came immediately after. There was no probation period, no test of sincerity, no ledger of chores to repay the debt. The father's love operated on a logic that defies our deepest instincts for justice and fairness. This is the radical heart of the parable. The father's grace was not a reward for the son's repentance, it was the cause of it. The sight of that unconditional welcome is what made the son's true return possible. It challenges every notion we have about earned forgiveness. We often think forgiveness must be deserved, that it should follow a sufficient apology or a period of penance. This story presents a different model entirely, one where love sees the brokenness, runs toward it, and covers it not with conditions but with compassion. It asks a difficult, beautiful question. What becomes possible when we stop keeping score and start seeing the person, not their debt? Yet the story does not end with the celebration. Outside the house, listening to the music and laughter, stands the elder brother. He has been working in the field, faithful and dutiful. When he learns the reason for the festivities, he becomes angry and refuses to go inside. His father comes out and pleads with him, but the elder brother's response is a torrent of resentment. "Look, all these years I have been slaving for you and never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who devoured your property with prostitutes, comes back, you kill the fattened calf for him." His words are a stark contrast to the father's grace. He speaks in terms of slavery and transaction, of obedience as a currency to earn rewards. He cannot even say my brother, only this son of yours. His bitterness has built a wall between himself and his family. This elder brother represents a different, equally powerful obstacle to reconciliation, self-righteousness. He is the one who stayed, the one who followed the rules, the one who feels his loyalty has been taken for granted. His sense of injustice is palpable and, in a human sense, completely understandable. Why should the reckless one be celebrated while the reliable one is overlooked? His resentment is a prison of his own making. He is so focused on the ledger of fairness that he cannot see the gift standing right in front of him. The father's response to him is just as gentle and just as revolutionary as his welcome for the younger son. Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. The father does not dismiss the elder son's service. Instead, he reframes everything. First, he reaffirms their relationship. You are always with me. Second, he reminds him of his secure inheritance. All that is mine is yours. The father is not dividing his love, he is expanding the circle. The celebration is not a reward for bad behavior, it is a restoration of life. The father's plea is an urgent invitation, not to a duty, but to a joy the elder brother is missing. He is being asked to step out of the cold calculus of merit and into the warm, illogical light of grace. This is the story's profound second lesson. Forgiveness is not only for the one who did wrong, it is also for the one who holds the grudge. The elder brother's resentment is poisoning his own life. He is outside the feast, alone with his anger, while joy is happening inside. The father is offering him freedom, the freedom to let go of the scorecard and finally come home to a love that was never about earning in the first place. His stubborn sense of fairness is the very thing keeping him from the party. How many of us have stood outside our own happiness, arms crossed, because we were too busy keeping track of who deserved what? The father's plea to his elder son hangs in the air, a stark choice between the cold comfort of resentment and the vulnerable warmth of the feast. This tension between our hunger for justice and the deeper need for peace echoes across centuries and cultures, finding one of its most dramatic expressions in an ancient Indian epic. The Mahabharata, a sprawling tale of a great war between cousins, holds within it a smaller, devastating story about the poison of unchecked vengeance. After the war's brutal conclusion, a warrior named Ashwatthama is consumed by a grief so black it blots out all reason. His father, his beloved teacher, has been killed through what he sees as deceit. In that searing pain, he does not simply seek an eye for an eye, he seeks to extinguish an entire future. Under the cover of night, he enters the camp of the victorious Pandava brothers and commits an act so horrific it chills the blood. He murders their unborn heirs, the children sleeping in the wombs of their wives. It is a crime designed to inflict maximum despair, to ensure the victor's lineage ends with them. The reaction is instantaneous and volcanic. When Arjuna, the greatest Pandava archer, discovers the atrocity, his rage is a physical force. He swears a terrible oath to hunt down Ashwatthama and deliver a punishment of equal, if not greater, ferocity. The cycle is primed to spin anew, vengeance answering vengeance in an endless, descending spiral of blood. But then Lord Krishna intervenes. Krishna does not dismiss the horror of the act. He does not ask the Pandavas to forget their loss or their fury. Instead, he does something far more difficult. He asks them to see beyond the immediate heat of retaliation. He steps into the path of their wrath and presents a profound question: where does this end? If you kill Ashwatthama for killing your unborn sons, what stops his kin from then killing you for killing him? Justice, he teaches, must sometimes be tempered with a wiser, more forward-looking compassion, not for the sake of the offender, but for the sake of everyone else who would be caught in the ensuing storm. Krishna's lesson is that true strength lies not in the capacity to inflict equal pain, but in the courage to absorb a terrible wrong and consciously choose to break the chain. He advocates for a justice that restores balance without perpetuating the madness, a punishment that fits the crime but does not ignite a perpetual war. In this story, forgiveness is not a sentimental overlooking of evil. It is a strategic, courageous decision for collective survival. It is the recognition that sometimes the most powerful response to a wrong is not another wrong, but a difficult, deliberate act that says, "The violence stops with me." This ancient wisdom forces us to ask in our own conflicts, are we seeking punishment or are we seeking peace? And is it possible that the two are not always the same? Krishna's question echoes across the ages, a challenge to every society shattered by conflict. Where does it end? For a nation like South Africa in the early 1990s, that was not a philosophical question, it was a terrifyingly practical one. After decades of the brutal, legalized racial oppression of apartheid, the system was finally crumbling. The oppressed black majority had endured untold suffering, while many in the white minority lived in fear of the bloody retribution they believed was inevitable. The stage was set for a civil war, a final, violent settling of scores, and then a man walked out of prison. Nelson Mandela had spent 27 years in a cell for his fight against apartheid. He had every reason, every personal justification, to be consumed by bitterness and a desire for vengeance. The world expected a firebrand, a revolutionary leader ready to lead his people in a righteous war. What they witnessed instead was a miracle of moral imagination. Mandela emerged not with fists clenched but with a hand outstretched. He understood that military victory could win power, but only forgiveness could win a peace that lasted. His most radical act was to see the humanity even in his oppressors and to believe that a shared future was more important than a divided past. This was not a sentimental feeling, it was a breathtakingly bold political strategy. To build a new nation from the ashes of the old, he championed a process as painful as it was necessary, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This was not a court of law in the traditional sense. Its goal was not to imprison the guilty, though many feared it would become a witch hunt. Instead, the TRC, as it was known, offered a difficult bargain, a trade of truth for amnesty. Perpetrators of human rights abuses from all sides, police officers, soldiers, freedom fighters, could come forward. If they provided a full and public confession of their crimes, detailing exactly what they had done, to whom and on whose orders, they could be granted legal immunity. The price of their freedom was the complete, unvarnished truth, broadcast on national radio and television for all to hear. For the victims and their families, this was an agonizing process. They had to sit in rooms and listen as the people who had tortured their loved ones, who had disappeared their children, described the horrors in cold, clinical detail. There was no guaranteed punishment, only the brutal clarity of testimony. The courage required here was almost beyond comprehension. It asked victims to exchange their right to retribution for the fragile hope of narrative closure and national healing. Why would anyone agree to such a painful bargain? Because the alternative was a silence more dangerous than truth. A society where everyone knew terrible secrets but no one spoke them aloud, where suspicion and hatred festered under a thin veneer of peace. The TRC was a monumental gamble on the idea that knowing, as painful as it was better than not knowing. That a wound must be cleaned and exposed to air before it can ever hope to heal. It was restorative justice on a national scale, prioritizing the repair of a broken social fabric over the punishment of individuals. The process was messy, imperfect, and left many feeling that justice had been denied. Yet it provided something a war crimes tribunal could not, a shared, official record of the past. It forced a nation to look in the mirror, not to point fingers in the dark. Mandela's vision and the TRC's painful hearing stand as one of history's most profound experiments in societal forgiveness. It asked an entire people to hold two seemingly impossible truths at once, that grievous wrongs were committed and that the only way forward was together. It proved that reconciliation is not about forgetting the past, but about remembering it in a way that does not destroy the future. The agonizing public confessions of South Africa's Truth Commission reveal a profound truth that reconciliation often demands we stare directly into the heart of our pain. But what happens when the threat is not a painful past but an imminent, violent future? Can inner peace become a shield, and can calmness itself disarm an aggressor? An old Japanese tale offers a surprising answer. It begins not with a warrior, but with a master of a very different art, the tea ceremony. This tea master was in the service of a feudal lord, and during a journey, the lord insisted he wear a samurai sword, a symbol of status. Walking through a bustling town, the tea master, unfamiliar with the warrior's bearing, was mistaken for a true samurai by a rough, aggressive ronin, a masterless samurai. The ronin, seeking to test his skill or perhaps win a cheap reputation, confronted him in the street and challenged him to a duel at dawn the next day. The tea master was terrified. He was a man of peace, of precise, graceful movement, not of violence. He knew he would certainly be killed. In his desperation, he sought out the only person he could think of, a famous swordsmanship teacher who lived nearby, a true ronin known for his skill. He begged the master for a crash course in swordsmanship, hoping to learn just enough to not die disgracefully. The swordsmanship master listened to his frantic story. Instead of reaching for a practice sword, he asked the tea master to perform his art. "Prepare a bowl of tea for me, just as you would for your lord," he said. Confused but obedient, the tea master began. He cleaned the utensils with ritual care, measured the powdered tea, whisked it with a focused, flowing motion. His fear fell away as he sank into the familiar, meditative practice of his life's work. His breathing slowed, his movements became economical and utterly present. He handed the bowl to the teacher with perfect calm. The ronin took the tea, sipped it, and then set it down. "That is enough," he said. "You are ready for your duel." The tea master was bewildered. "You have taught me nothing about the sword," the master smiled. "The mindset with which you just prepared this tea is the only mindset you need. When you face your opponent tomorrow, do not think of swords or fighting. Simply prepare to meet your death with the same calm, dignified, and utterly focused presence you brought to this ceremony. See yourself not as a fighter, but as a man performing his final, most important act." The next morning, the tea master went to the appointed place. Following the teacher's instruction, he let go of any thought of winning or technique. He visualized the steps of the tea ceremony. When the ronin arrived, glaring and ready to strike, he saw something utterly unexpected. His supposed opponent stood not in a fighter's stance, but with a serene, upright posture. The tea master slowly drew his sword, holding it with the same mindful attention he would give a tea whisk. He looked directly at the ronin, his expression one of profound acceptance and complete lack of fear. He was prepared to die, and in that preparation he found an unshakable peace. The aggressive ronin stared, his own anger and bluster meeting a wall of tranquil resolve. He saw no panic to play off, no aggression to counter. He saw only a deep, formidable stillness. After a long, tense moment, the ronin lowered his own sword. He bowed deeply. "I apologize," he said. "I have mistaken you for someone else. You are clearly a master of the highest order. Please forgive my intrusion." And he left. The duel was over without a single blow being struck. This story is a masterclass in nonviolent power. The tea master did not win through combat skill, but through the sheer force of his composed spirit. He reconciled a violent conflict not by matching aggression with aggression, but by transforming the entire energy of the encounter. His inner peace became a mirror, forcing the ronin to see the emptiness of his own bullying. True strength, the tale whispers, is not the capacity to destroy, but the courage to be so fully present and accepting that there is nothing for hostility to grab onto. It asks us in our own confrontations, what would happen if we met anger not with more anger, but with unshakable calm? The Tea Master's serene defiance offers a path, but what happens when the violence is not a single duel but a tidal wave of annihilation? In April 1994, the African nation of Rwanda was engulfed in 100 days of unspeakable horror. Long-standing ethnic tensions between the Hutu majority and Tutsi minority were ignited into a planned, systematic genocide. Neighbors turned on neighbors, machetes became the instruments of a national madness. In those 100 days, an estimated 800,000 men, women, and children were slaughtered. Amid this cataclysm, a young university student named Immaculée Ilibagiza, a Tutsi, found a sliver of sanctuary. A local Hutu pastor, risking his own life, hid her and 7 other women in a tiny, concealed bathroom in his home. The space was no larger than a small closet, barely 3 feet by 4 feet. For 91 days, the 8 women lived in that suffocating darkness, unable to stand, barely able to move. They communicated in whispers. They survived on scraps of food the pastor could secretly bring them, and outside the thin wall they heard everything. They heard the chants of the killer mobs. They heard the screams of victims, some of whom were their own friends and family. They heard the killers searching the pastor's house, pounding on the very door that concealed them, demanding he turn over any Tutsis in hiding. The terror was a physical presence in that tiny room. During those endless days, Immaculée received the confirmation she had dreaded. Her beloved parents, her 2 brothers, all of her immediate family except one brother studying abroad had been murdered. The news plunged her into a grief so deep it threatened to drown her, and with that grief came a fury, a burning, all-consuming hatred for the killers. In the darkness, she wrestled with it. She fantasized about revenge, about what she would do if she ever got out. But she was a devout Catholic, and her faith presented a stark, impossible challenge. She prayed, but her prayers felt empty, choked by rage. She realized her hatred was becoming a second prison, one inside her own mind, even more confining than the physical bathroom. She made a conscious, agonizing decision. She would use her time in that room not just to hide her body, but to fight for her soul. She began to pray in earnest, not for escape or vengeance, but for the strength to forgive. She later wrote that she started with the Lord's Prayer, and when she reached the words, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us," she would stop. She could not say them. The hypocrisy felt too great, so she sat with those words. She prayed for the desire to forgive. Slowly, painfully, she began to see the killers not as monsters, but as lost, poisoned human beings consumed by a hatred they had been taught. This was not excusing their actions. It was an attempt to understand the source of the evil, to separate the sin from the sinner in her own heart. She described a moment of profound spiritual clarity, where she felt a divine love wash over her, and in that love, she found the strength to release her hatred. She verbally forgave the killers, whispering their names one by one in the dark. When the genocide finally ended and she emerged skeletal and forever changed, she was free in a way few could comprehend. She was free from the poison that had threatened to claim her from the inside out. Years later, working for the United Nations, she chose to return to Rwanda. She made the staggering decision to visit a prison filled with genocide perpetrators. In one meeting, she came face to face with the man who had led the mob that killed her mother and one of her brothers. He was sickly, awaiting trial. He confessed his crime to her in detail, expecting her rage. Instead, she looked at him and said, "I forgive you." The man, utterly broken, wept. For Immaculée, this was not a moment of weakness, but the ultimate assertion of her power. Her forgiveness was a conscious, difficult choice for her own liberation. It was a refusal to allow the killers to continue defining her life with hatred. Her story, like South Africa's, shows that forgiveness in the face of catastrophic evil is not about forgetting justice. It is about a victim reclaiming their future. It is a profound, personal step that, when multiplied, becomes the first fragile stitch in the torn fabric of a nation. It asks the most difficult question of all: if she could find a way to forgive after that, what might be possible in our own lives with our own far smaller grievances. The most profound reconciliations often begin with a single, fragile sentence. Decades after helping to forge a new nation, two of its greatest architects were not speaking. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, once close friends and collaborators in the cause of American independence, had become bitter political rivals. Their feud crystallized in the vicious presidential election of 1800, a contest so filled with personal attacks and partisan fury it nearly tore the young republic apart. When Jefferson won, Adams, heartbroken and angry, left the Capitol before dawn on the day of the inauguration, refusing to attend his successor's ceremony. For the next 12 years, a heavy silence fell between them. They were two titans living in separate worlds, Adams in Massachusetts, Jefferson at Monticello in Virginia, each nursing wounds and convictions, their friendship a casualty of the very democracy they helped create. The breach seemed permanent, a sad footnote to their shared history, but one man refused to accept that ending. Dr. Benjamin Rush, a fellow signer of the Declaration of Independence and a friend to both, began a quiet, persistent campaign of reconciliation. He wrote to each man separately, suggesting the other had expressed kind feelings and missed the old friendship. He appealed to their legacy, their shared mortality, and the higher purpose they both served. For years, his efforts seemed in vain. Then, on New Year's Day, 1812, John Adams, then 76 years old, finally broke the silence. He sat down and penned a short, careful letter to Thomas Jefferson. It was not an apology, nor did it rehash old arguments. It was a simple, strategic overture. He mentioned that he was sending a small gift, 2 pieces of homespun fabric, humorously noting it was a product of his own state. The letter was a peace offering disguised as a mundane courtesy, a way to test the waters without losing face. Jefferson, then 68, understood the gesture perfectly. He responded warmly and promptly, ignoring the politics of the past and focusing on the gift and their shared memories. The dam had broken. What followed was one of the most extraordinary correspondences in American history. For the next 14 years, until their deaths on the very same day, July 4, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the declaration they had crafted together, they exchanged over 150 letters. They wrote about everything: philosophy, religion, history, the French Revolution, their families, and their aches and pains of old age. They debated fiercely, often disagreeing on fundamental points of government and human nature. Adams, the passionate realist, clashed with Jefferson, the optimistic idealist. Yet their disagreements were now framed not by personal animosity, but by deep mutual respect. The letters are filled with affectionate salutations and heartfelt expressions of esteem. Adams would sign off with great esteem, "I am, dear sir, your friend and servant." Jefferson would reply in kind. They had rediscovered the man behind the political opponent. Their reconciliation was a masterpiece of mature friendship. It required immense humility from both to set aside the pride of a 12-year silence. It was fueled by a shared higher purpose, their love for the country they had built, and a desire to pass on its philosophical foundations. Most of all, it required the courage Adams showed in sending that first, tentative letter, the courage to reach out first, to make oneself vulnerable to rejection for the sake of something more important than being right. They proved that reconciliation between equals is not about erasing differences, but about building a new relationship atop them, one where respect is stronger than disagreement. In their final years, they offered each other not political alliance, but the far greater gift of thoughtful, engaged companionship, writing the final, beautiful chapter of their story with ink, not anger. Their friendship's restoration whispers a crucial question to us. What valued connection in your own life is waiting on the other side of a single, courageous message? The ink of Adams and Jefferson's letters had barely dried on a new piece when, across Europe, a storm of a different kind was brewing. A decade into the 20th century, the continent descended into a mechanized slaughter called the Great War. By December 1914, the Western Front was a frozen, muddy scar across the landscape. British and German soldiers faced each other across a strip of blasted earth known as no man's land, living in trenches filled with water, rats, and the constant fear of death. Hatred for the enemy was a necessary fuel for the war machine. Each side fed propaganda depicting the other as monstrous subhumans. Then, on Christmas Eve, something impossible happened. As dusk fell, German troops in their trenches near Ypres began placing small Christmas trees, adorned with candles, along the parapets. The soft, flickering lights appeared across the darkness. And then they began to sing, Still Nacht, Heilige Nacht, Silent Night, Holy Night. The familiar carol drifted across the silent, frozen waste. For a moment, the British soldiers in their opposing trenches listened in stunned silence. Then, from their side, a response. They began to sing the same hymn in English. Soon, other carols joined the chorus from both sides, a duet of shared memory floating over a field meant for killing. Then came the calls, Merry Christmas, Tommy, Frohe Weihnachten, English. Cautiously, soldiers began to emerge from their holes. They climbed out of the trenches and with hands raised stepped into no man's land. They met in the middle, not with rifles but with hesitant handshakes. They exchanged gifts, not bullets, cigarettes, chocolate, plum puddings for tins of sausage and schnapps. They showed each other photographs of wives and sweethearts. They used the brief truce to bury their dead, whose bodies had lain for weeks in the frozen mud, performing joint services for sons and brothers from both sides. And then, in several reported spots along the front, they did something that defies all logic of war. They produced a soccer ball. For a few hours, in the mud and cold of a Belgian field, British and German soldiers played football. They laughed, they argued over rules, they formed makeshift goals with their caps. They were not soldiers in that moment, they were simply young men remembering what it was to play. This spontaneous Christmas truce was a miracle of human recognition. It was not ordered by generals or governments. In fact, high command on both sides was horrified by it. It was a grassroots uprising of common humanity, imposed from below by the very men ordered to kill each other. In sharing carols, gifts, and a game, they saw through the artificial construct of the enemy. They recognized the shared dread in the trenches, the same longing for home, the same cold, the same fear. The hatred imposed upon them melted away in the face of a shared human experience, Christmas. The lesson of the truce is not that war is easy to stop. It tragically was not. The generals eventually reasserted control, artillery barrages resumed, and the slaughter continued for 4 more brutal years. The lesson is far more piercing. It shows that the walls between us, even the most fortified and violent ones, are often thinner than we think. They can be dissolved in an instant by a shared song, a shared memory, a simple game. The truce proves that the capacity for fellowship resides alongside the capacity for conflict, and that sometimes all it takes is a moment of mutual vulnerability for our common humanity to shine through. It forces a haunting question: if those men, trapped in the most violent of circumstances, could see the person in their enemy, what invisible trenches have we dug in our own minds, and what would it take for us to lay down our arms and meet in the middle? The Christmas truce flickered and died, but its light reveals a pattern woven through every story we have heard. From a father sprinting toward his prodigal son to a nation choosing painful truth over vengeful silence, from a tea master's stillness to a prisoner's whispered pardon, these tales share a common, powerful thread. They all testify to the immense, exhausting cost of carrying anger. That cost is not just emotional, it is a tax on our future, a weight that bends our spirit and narrows our world. The elder brother fuming outside the feast, the warriors poised for endless cycles of retaliation. They are all trapped in a prison of their own resentment. Forgiveness, then, emerges not as a passive feeling but as the most active choice we can make. It is a deliberate release, a setting down of a burden we were never meant to carry forever. It is the tea master choosing calm over combat, Immaculate choosing prayer over hatred, Adams choosing to write that first tentative letter. This choice holds a transformative power that radiates outward. It heals the individual first by reclaiming inner peace from the grip of past hurt. But its true magic is that it never stops there. Individual healing becomes the cornerstone for communal restoration. Mandela understood that a nation's peace depended on it, that without a collective decision to look forward together, the past would forever poison the present. Reconciliation, in every case, proves to be something far more profound than forgetting. It is not amnesia. It is the courageous decision to remember without being held hostage by the memory. It is carrying the lesson but laying down the weapon. It is building a new future on ground stained by the past, not by pretending the stains are not there, but by refusing to let them dictate the architecture of what comes next. So we arrive at a quiet, personal question, one that these stories gently place before each of us. Look at the landscape of your own life, at the relationships shaped by old arguments, by disappointments left unspoken, by wounds that still feel tender. Is there one connection, perhaps grown distant or brittle, that might benefit from a single, small step toward repair? That step does not need to be a grand pronouncement of forgiveness. It might simply be a message sent without expectation, a kind word offered where there was silence, or the conscious decision to let an old grievance finally dissolve within you. The journey of 1,000 miles, as the proverb goes, begins with a single step. What might your first step be? We would be honored to hear your reflections or your own stories of reconciliation in the comments below, as we continue this vital conversation about healing together.